Hello, everyone, and welcome tonight to the Nevada PTA Virtual Town Hall about distance and digital learning. We are happy to have you joining us on Facebook Live, or if you're watching the replay later on YouTube, thank you for joining us. My name is Rebecca Garcia, and I'm the president of the Nevada Parent Teachers Association. And tonight, we are joined by experts from the Nevada Department of Education and the Nevada Digital Learning Collaborative. Hybrid, distance, digital learning have become terms that we have all started to use a lot in the last few months, even as school districts across the state choose different models for back to school. Some elements of digital learning are going to be more common for all of our students across the state. And so we are really grateful to have this opportunity tonight to answer questions, get tips and feedbacks about how we can make this more successful. And so thank you all for joining us on the panel tonight. We'll introduce you guys in just a second, and thank you in the audience for joining us. And I am joined tonight by our Nevada PTA Vice President of Advocacy, Alison Turner. And Alison, if you'll start the introductions for us.
Absolutely. First off, we'd like to welcome Dr. Jonathan Moore. He's the Deputy Superintendent of Student Achievement for the Nevada Department of Education. He oversees the Offices of Assessment, Data, and Accountability Management, Career Readiness, Adult Learning, and Education Options, Early Learning and Development, Special Ed, Standards and Instructional Support, and Student and School Support. He previously served as the Associate Superintendent of K-12 Academic Standards at the Arizona Department of Ed, where he played a major role in the adoption of the state's academic standards for English language arts and mathematics in 2016 and science and social studies in 2018. He earned a bachelor's in political science and international studies from Loyola University in Chicago. And he also has a master's degree in secondary education and a doctorate degree in educational leadership and innovation, both from Arizona State. Welcome, Jonathan.
And we also have Jayne Malorni. She is an educational program professional at the Nevada Department of Education in the Office of Standards and Instructional Support. You guys have really short titles. That's and Jayne leads the policy and educational work in K-12 social studies, financial literacy, multicultural, world language, and distance learning. Additionally, Jayne is co-leading the Nevada Digital Learning Collaboratives, which will assist districts, schools, and educators in implementing instruction using technology for learning in every classroom. Jayne, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Next up is Cindi Chang, who oversees K-12 computer science education programs in the Office of Standards and Instructional Support at the Nevada Department of Ed. Her other assignments include policy and practice around K-12 integrated technology programs and supporting educators, students, and families with the transition to online and hybrid models of learning as co-lead of the Nevada Digital Learning Collaborative. Thank you and welcome to you, Cindi.
And I like the beach backgrounds. We all decided that we want to be there. So we're all going to take ourselves magically to the beach. So everybody joining us, envision that you're on the beach. And finally, but not last but not least, we have Jordana McCudden, who was selected as a digital engineer and is beginning her 21st year as an educator in Clark County. She has taught elementary and middle school social studies, web design, multimedia. She spent 2 years as an instructional coach and is now a project facilitator for the ELL divisions. Thank you for joining us, Jordana. And also we want to note that Dr. Moore recently had some dental work, so we appreciate you soldiering through with us in doing a virtual event still. And we'll try not to make you talk too much and save that pain. So there's lots of great other people on the panel, so I'm sure you guys can fill the time as well with us. But again, thank you everybody for joining us, and let's get into the questions.
So Jonathan, or whomever is going to cover this best, can you share some information about the efforts that the Nevada Department of Education is making in supporting, like an overview of our digital and distance learning initiatives?
Yes, so thank you for the question. So right when COVID began, as an agency, we immediately sprung into action. We were in close contact, our superintendent, with all the district superintendents. And so that really helped us keep a close ear to the ground in terms of what they believe their needs are. Of course, across 17 districts and approximately 58 charter schools, there's a lot of diversity, right? And so while there are some uniform needs, there's also some very different and unique contexts as well. So some of the things we've done, if you haven't heard of Nevada Reads, that is a partnership we have with Renaissance, which came out of our Standards and Instructional Support Offices, which provides free access to digital literacy resources. Students are able to log in, they're able to select texts that are of interest to them, that their teachers have identified that are at their level, and they're able to read over 30,000 books to choose from. So that's one. We wanted to provide something, especially going into summer. We've also then launched our Nevada Digital Learning Collaborative, which Jayne and Cindi will talk about. And from that, that's more of an umbrella term, which gives way to our statewide learning management system, as well as statewide content and our digital engineers, which Jordana represents, that I'm sure she'll talk about. But I'll stop there.
So Cindi or Jayne, if you want to share some more, what is the concept kind of behind the Digital Learning Collaborative? What is that, and how will different districts, because as Jonathan said, 17 districts that are everything from one of the biggest in the country to some of the smallest in the country, how are those tools going to be used across the state?
So initially we immediately started right away with how can we support all of our stakeholders, so all of our districts, educators, and students across the state. We came up with the collaborative. And so when we say the NVDLC, the Nevada Digital Learning Collaborative, we really mean that to heart, as this is a full collaborative with not just every school across the state involved, but organizations, business and industry, really pulling together on providing the resources necessary to really make sure and ensure all of our students receive a high quality standard aligned instruction, and making sure that they all have access to the needs that they do need to be successful. So we created what was called, and with, there was about 10 of us in a room, with you will, around a table, and we really brainstormed this idea of what do we need. And we did a survey, but we really went to action right away. We knew we had a sense of urgency, and I feel like that sense of urgency has not ended. I wake up every day thinking like, okay, we have 150 more things to do on top of my 150 list that I haven't gotten done yet. And so we knew from a human capacity standpoint that we needed support. So we reached out to our wonderful educators that we have around our state who have the skill set as well as the connections within their communities. So our digital engineers, we have them represented from 12 different school districts from around the state, as well as charter schools and private schools actually, that are supporting and building the tools that that they actually deem that's really going to be meaningful and necessary for educators. So they are the boots on the ground, preparing resources for the individuals that are going to be in the trenches. We also have an admin team really focused on building those support sources for administrators on how to implement digital and distance learning on their school campus. And then Cindi, if you want to add.
Yeah, and so as we came up with these resources, and as our amazing team that Jayne recognized, our digital engineers, as we call them, began creating all these artifacts, we wanted to house them in a place that was accessible for everyone. And so we built this website, the nvdigitallearning.org website, to where we could upload these one-pagers, these video tutorials, these webinars that the folks are creating, and that it be accessible to not only our districts, our charters, our privates, but anyone across the nation could actually, again, benefit from the resources there. And as Jayne mentioned, we wanted to make sure all of our stakeholders were included. And so we recognize and acknowledge the digital divide, and that we're working on resources in that direction as well to supplement and to support equity of instruction. We recognize the need for our educators to feel confident to have that self-efficacy when they're teaching in a whole new way that they never imagined in this online environment. And then also to support our students and their families, because now our families are partners in education that they never imagined that they would be at this level. And so that's an important thing we wanted to recognize and then to support as well. So we put those into place.
Cindi, if I may, a quick clarifying question. We're trying to keep this, so that everybody understands acronyms and terms. So when you say artifacts, I think you explained, but if you don't mind just tying that back, those are the documents, the webinars,
yeah.
Can you just clarify that?
Absolutely. I use the term artifacts because you'll hear that, you'll see that, but then I reference the tutorials, the infographics, the webinars, the trainings that are up there. We have monthly blogs that are put on there. We have Twitter chat. They're, like I said, these digital engineers truly are engineers. They're creating things that one, they know is a need because they need them as well, but two, that they know that will support this learning environment.
That's great. So, thank you so much. And so artifacts just means all the resources.
All the resources
that are available. And that kind of maybe moves a little bit into the next question. We've talked around a little bit, what is a digital engineer? But I think this one's for Jordana. Tell us, what is it like? What does a digital engineer do, Jordana?
We do really what teachers always do. We're just doing it in a collaborative form where there is, and Jayne can correct me, I think about 60 of us across the state. And we have been separated into specific groups to work where we have the most skill. So some are working on infographics, some are making webinars. I'm doing a monthly virtual chat geared towards supporting parents. Everyone has their niche of the types of artifacts that they want to contribute. And within that, we're kind of laying a huge blanket across the education field so that there's really something for everybody. For me personally, I'm trying to make sure that the parents are supported. I think that, this is a huge shift, certainly for teachers. Teachers are really having to wrap their brain around what does my job look like in this new capacity, but the fact is that it's the same for parents. Parents have to rethink, because before we could, and I'm a parent of 3 school-age children, I could confidently send my children off to school and know that they were getting a quality education, and I knew when they came home what questions to ask them to support them, make sure they were doing their homework and checking their grades. But my role as a parent has changed dramatically. And so I want to offer through virtual chats just a platform to help support parents, because that's a big shift in what our role is now. The fact is that parents have to have an integral part of the regular hour-to-hour even events that happen for their children at school in order for them to be successful. And that alone is taking just a lot of effort from the entire community. I hope that answered the question fully.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that was great. I think that leads really well into the next question, that so some districts are going to a hybrid model. Some, like my kids, attend in Clark County, so we're going to be 100% distance. But almost all students across the state are going to have some level of digital learning, or days where they're not in a classroom for a full day, like traditional school that we're used to. So how would you explain, or how do you think we need to start making this shift of understanding how digital learning can be different from kind of that 6-hour and 11-minute, or however many minutes it is? I should know that, but I don't. I can tell you the bell times at my kids' school, but from that time that we're so used to this new concept, like for my kids, of being 100% online in 4th, 6th, and 8th grade, what's going to look different? What do we need to expect differently about education in a digital space?
I think that from the teacher's standpoint, it really takes a sense of empathy to try to imagine what is going on for the learner and developing your classroom around that idea. So there will be instances where children are at home and can log on and do what we call synchronous or live lessons with teachers. And I know down here in Clark County, that will be a requirement, but we know that not all children will be able to do that because they will be in daycare or because there's 4 kids at home and they just don't have the bandwidth or even the amount of Chromebooks for everybody to be logging on at certain times. So there also has to be a recorded lessons and other resources so that all kids can access. So teachers really just need to think about providing academics for all the different situations, and that includes hybrid as well. So even if you're seeing students every other day or however it might look in other counties, you still have to accommodate for all of the time when they're at home, and to make sure that the time that you're with them is not something that can't be made up. Like if they miss class, then I think it becomes even harder for them to catch up. And so there really just needs to be a balance of looking at what is this like from the learner's perspective, and then through using our online formats, how can we then get the learning across to them? And I think as long as we're thinking of the student first, teachers are so creative on making sure that students do have access. It's just, we tend to get wrapped up in what does it look like for me to deliver? We really just have to stop and take a breath and think about what is it like for them? And then we go, oh, there's an app for that. There's a platform for that. And I think that it will be kind of like being a first-year teacher. Even for our veteran teachers, it feels like a first-year teacher, and it's very uncomfortable, but we're doing it. And so we all have to give ourselves, that being teachers, kids, and families, some grace to learn as we kickstart, but it will only be uncomfortable for a little while. And then, I mean, everything starts out hard and it gets easier.
That's a great answer, Jordana. Thank you. This is something I've really hoped can come out of this. We really, at Nevada PTA, we really believe that parents being partners in their children's education. And I hope that this is a good thing that can come out of all of this craziness for sure. So this question is pretty much for anybody who wants to take it. Can you give us an overview of programs or websites that our students will be using for digital learning? Is there like a master list or a cheat sheet or an overview of what that's going to look like? Okay, don't all jump on at the same time.
Jump on. I feel like I have. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead, Jordana. I'm gonna say
I know
it
through
live with the three of you.
You probably have a good statewide overview. I know here in Clark County we're using Canvas and Google Classroom, and Google Meets is going to be really heavy as well. But there's so many great platforms that teachers can access that I see all over Twitter, Flipgrid, and creative ways to Google Slides and Nearpod. So just be comfortable in trying out something new with your child if you're there sitting side by side supporting. And again, we'll give a lot of grace for everybody to figure it out as we go along.
And to echo what Jordana was saying, and back to Alison's question, what we do know across the state is that there is such diversity, not only in terms of context, but also in terms of comfortability and proficiency with distance learning. We know that educators like Jordana and certain schools and school districts are a lot farther along on the distance education continuum. And so they have tools and supports in place. We also know that some educators and schools and districts are just beginning that journey. And so what we wanted to do at the state is at least provide a base set of consistent resources that should educators, schools need access to, that they have them. And then for those who are more proficient or comfortable, certainly augmenting or using their own tools. So as I mentioned earlier, we have Mayan Reader, which is no cost students, which is a platform of over 30,000 digital literacy books. Cindi and Jayne can talk a little bit more, but we have Discovery Education, which provides access to content resources, curricular resources for grades pre-K through 12. And then we've recently launched a statewide learning management system, or a virtual classroom. And I'll leave the two of them to kind of elaborate.
And I think that actually leads right into our next question about programs or trainings that'll be available for both students and families who need that support on closing the gap with computers and technology, because I think that's one of the things that we hear so much from families is, you know, they ask the question of like, what platform is going to be used, but really I think what the statement behind that is, and how do I figure out how to do it, you know, because it's suddenly like, and, you know, having multiple kids, a lot of us for parents go, if each kid is using 4 programs, am I having to learn 12? So maybe Cindi or Jayne, if you want to explain kind of what tools are available to help people understand these platforms and get a better understanding of the technology.
Sure. So, go ahead, Cindi. You start.
I'll talk about platforms. I'll just turn it over to Jayne for content. How about we do that? So with the platforms, you really nailed it, Rebecca, because I know my own children all went through Clark County School District as well. My youngest is 21 now, though, so we're beyond that. But even as techie as I am, when I had all 6 of them on different platforms doing different things with all the different, I was like, okay, time out. So I totally get that. So to what Jonathan said, it was important that we support where districts and charters wanted to participate, a consistent platform that can be used across the district. And so what we landed on was Canvas, because of the integration with all of the other things that Jordana mentioned with the Flipgrid and the Apex and Edgenuity. And I mean, it literally links into Google Classroom and all of that. It's a blank canvas to build off of. But it provides that opportunity for collaboration, so project-based learning in an online environment, carrying that over. It provides supports for teachers when it comes to grading things, makes it easier. You can set mastery levels in it so that as students master certain things, then they can move on. Because I think the last thing we really want to do after our kids have been off for so long and everything has been turned upside down, that as soon as they come back, we test them to death just to see where they're at. But we want to move them into smoothly into evaluating where they're at, meeting them where they're at, and then moving them forward to where they need to be on a standard-based continuum. And so this platform had all of that, which is why the state decided to support in this manner, but not take away from the familiarity that folks have with Schoology or Google Classroom or any of those other things, because that was really important with all of the change, that there be that base for the educators. But then additionally the supports, and so Jayne can talk more about on the content side of things.
So with the content, we do have Discovery Education that the state has secured for the next 2 years, but there will be trainings. So when we talk about trainings and professional learning for educators, we are also very cognitive that we need to really support our students and families as well. And so even the work with Discovery Education and with Canvas, as well as in the NVDLC, we are very intentional about making sure that we include all audience members into how we can support them in their needs. So when we're developing how-to guides, we are developing from a parent perspective. How do I look on my student's Canvas page, and what should I be looking for? How do I know like what they're doing? How do I know they're being successful? How do I know they're completing the work? How do they earn the work? Right. So there's those step-by-step guides that we are creating for both Canvas and Discovery Ed, and they both have those modules of support as well within the actual platform. Once school starts, I can speak for Discovery Ed right away because we've seen it, but there's toolkits that are available, so parents will get access immediately and they will be able to see too what their students are working on. So when things and assignments or tasks, performance tasks or activities are assigned, they can be able to view these materials. They can also work with their students at home on off hours. So when we're not behind live screening and working one-on-one or either in office hours or live sessions, They can be working with their brother and sister, their cousins, neighbors, socially distanced, please, but in a way that can help provide and really support their students' learning. Because something we have to remember is that just because we're online learning does not mean learning stops. It means that learning continues. And my tagline, which is my thing now I say perpetually, is learning still can happen anywhere, anytime, and it is for everyone. So the environment is different. The learning environment has changed, but learning itself has not changed. And that is something that we really need to hold on to, that just because school buildings are closed does not mean school is closed. And language matters, and we need to really make that shift in that understanding. But we at the agency, as well as I think just as an educational community as a whole, know that we are all in this together. It's going to take teamwork. It's going to take flexibility. It's going to take understanding to know that we're not going to be experts on day one. Like Jordana said, we are all first year educators again, trying to weed through the field of unknown. And we may fail, and we need to take some risks, but we're going to learn, and we're going to always do better. And that's what we mean. And that's what we do in Nevada. We're battle born for a reason, and that's why.
I love that. As a follow-up to that, so those resources, because that is such a huge question for parents right now about like, how do I access Canvas, which, so not all districts have to use Canvas, but it is available to all, right? And we know that at least like in Clark County, it'll be used. So that's a huge percentage of students across the state who'll be using it. And it's a learning management system, also called an LMS. Those are common terms for some of us, even if you're not in education, if you have used it for business. But I loved how, Jonathan, you called it a virtual classroom. And I think that's a good way to kind of think about it, is that organizational tool of where everything is and how to find everything. Because I think otherwise sometimes it gets overwhelming. But if parents want to access these resources, are they all going to be on the Nevada Digital Learning Collaborative website? Is that where they would find them, or do they have to wait to get them from teachers or districts?
They will be on the website. So we highly encourage your listeners, as well as all families, to subscribe to nvdigitallearning.org. And every time we upload materials, new resources, documentation, how-to guides, one-pagers of information, events that are happening, all of that information is going to be on that website. And if you subscribe, you will be then you will get pinged, if you will, when something new is on there. And so all of that is going to be available for all stakeholders to be able to view and support. There will be certain things that will be addressed as far as professional learning for educators on Canvas, if they're using Canvas. But everything we can will be available on the website, due to the fact that that is public facing, and we want all to use that and all to really help and make sure that this school year goes off with a hitch, and that learning is occurring, and we are teaching the standards, and we're preparing our students to be college, career, civic, and community ready.
Awesome.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great answer. And that's actually also a great segue. Nevada PTA also is well known for standing for equity and inclusion. And so one of the other questions we've had, not just from people who are in this situation, but from others who have that lens as they look at things, is what kind of training or program or outreach is being set up to help close the gap for kids who are less familiar, and their families for that matter, who are less familiar, have less access with computers and technology. And I'm even gonna add a clarifying point. So classic conversation with a principal who wanted very much to have everything available to everybody. And we're having a conversation, and I'm talking about students and families that don't have high-speed internet access and a device that's readily available, and et cetera, et cetera. And then we talked about something else, and she said, oh, but it's on our website. And I said, well, that's great. But unfortunately, for those families that don't have easy access, that's actually not that helpful. So what else are we doing, I guess, statewide, really? Is there an initiative to try to bridge that gap for those students and families?
So I'll start. So it kind of touches on two things, right? When you talk about equity and access, is one, connectivity and devices. So going back to diversity across our state, we have areas of our state that don't have access to quality broadband. And then that's compounded by a device. So what good is a device if I then can't go home and then engage in my learning? So our superintendent has been working very closely both with the State Board of Education and also business leaders and the Governor's Office of Science, Innovation, and Technology around just that. How do we get broadband accessible across the state as soon as possible? And when I say she's been feverishly working, she's been working with our federal delegation about what immediate changes could possibly be created in upcoming legislation, what legislation could be altered or waived in order to ensure that there's timely access to broadband, or the assurance that that will happen. So that's one of the things the department's actively engaged in. Another is you touched on devices. And so as part of the CARES Act, which is one of the federal sources that states have received in response to COVID, federal sources of funding, part of the CARES Act included a governor's emergency education relief fund. And we were fortunate that the governor has appropriated approximately $9 million for school districts and charter schools to allocate toward devices and connectivity. Is that enough? Absolutely not. But is it an important start? It is. And so just one more concrete thing before I turn it over is that when you talk about equity, so we know we have students who don't actually, and families who may not reside in what we consider a traditional home or apartment, whether it's a facility of some sort, whether it's a hotel of some sort. We have families residing outside of those traditional structures that we would define as a home structure. And so we must also consider them in terms of how do we ensure that they have consistent access to broadband? How do we ensure that they have devices as well? And so really working on, when we talk about timely expansion, like really trying to figure out how do we start to tackle that initially for our students living and families who are living in those types of environments.
If I may, I'll just comment here briefly. Thank you, Jonathan, because that was a great overview. And just so you know, Nevada PTA has been supporting efforts at the federal level to address the broadband issues, which are really significant in multiple counties here in Nevada. And also with devices, we also are aware that many of the issues with devices that we do have funds for is just supply chain, and that everybody everywhere, of course, is trying to fix those problems. So thank you. Just wanted to let you know we're with you.
Yeah. One of the questions that came in, is there a way for children to engage in arts, music, and those other electives via digital learning programs?
Yes, and teachers will figure those ways out. In my work with, we just figure it out. I know that one of my favorite pastimes when we were first on quarantine was being on Twitter. Then you'd see all the videos of like orchestras coming together and putting their, and dance recitals like that. So teachers are just as creative. In my work with ELL, we've been putting together Google Classrooms for teachers and for families, and both have resources for music, art. We're putting out everything, and we know that teachers know their content, and they will draw from whatever we put out there and make it work for them, because their goal is to get their standards out to their students so their students can show mastery. Being on a computer doesn't mean that you can't play the oboe. I remember last night, I think it was Roxanne James was talking about her kids going to her school to pick up their instruments, and they would be handing out instruments. So we will absolutely make the learning happen. This is what teachers do, and be confident in sending your kids, whatever sending is now, to school, knowing that your teachers are well aware of their standards, and we will figure out how to teach those standards given the current circumstances.
I
And
think
I
there's
would,
actually, so I was just going to say, I think there's some really cool things that are happening in the arts virtually. You know, my oldest went to Las Vegas Academy years ago, but it is amazing to see some of the stuff that got produced out of the mariachi programs and things like that, that really were just amazing. Jonathan?
And I was just going to say also, what we do know is our educators across the state are working very hard to ensure that kids have a quality education, they're navigating the circumstances, considering health risk. But what I would also say to parents is, in the midst of all of that, if there are ever points where you feel like either your needs may not be met or you're craving something more or different, don't be afraid to reach out to your child's teacher, to your child's school. They're going to be responsive and they're going to want to think and be thought partners with you about how to ensure that that quality still remains in your child's education, that that rigor still remains. And so I just want to put that out there as well. As Jordana mentioned, and she's a reflection, educators are working extremely hard, but we do know that there occasionally may be something that requires additional attention. And so as a parent, don't be afraid to engage your child's teacher, your child's school or principal around what that could be for you or what that may look like for you or what those needs may be for you.
And I would just add that with the collaborative, we are also acutely aware that we want to ensure that all content is supported throughout the state. We know there's the focus in the core areas, but you know, kids want to come to school, right, to expand their horizons and to learn a variety of things. It's not just about reading and math, right? I loved math. I was a total math nerd, but I also loved history. Hence, probably why I was a social studies teacher. But right now we have, you know, there are students who depend. I have an 11-year-old nephew who is chomping at the bit to go to school. He's in a STEM school and he's super excited to go to his STEM classes. He wants to be a coder and he wants to code everything under the sun. And he thinks that that's how life then begins, is building and coding for new video games. And it's crazy, but this matters. This is important for our children. And so we understand that. So as a collaborative, we are working also to create support for curriculum courses and content for not just the fine arts, but for world languages, for STEM courses, for electives, so that we can make sure that all courses and all learning still continues for all of our students in Nevada.
So I think this is a program note for Rebecca. I'm going to skip a question here because I think there's a better segue. Okay, good. So that was just the perfect bridge to how are we looking sort of globally at how schools will build relationships between the teachers and administrators at the school and the students and families at home? Is there like an overall overarching look at how we're going to do that, or standards for it, or I don't know what that would entail?
No, that's a great question. Oh,
go ahead,
Jonathan,
Cindi. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that that's one of the reasons we, as part of the collaborative, we wanted an administrator group, because they're focused on the community within their school. And those were some of the questions that came up when we did our brainstorming at our first meeting, like, what does open house look like when you can't even open your doors? Or, you know, how do I build that community with my parents and my teachers and our students when we can't even be in the same room? And so from that brainstorming came PLCs, where administrators could get together each month and talk about it and provide resources and create those best practices webinars and how to do a virtual open house, and you know, how to teach middle schoolers how to open the locker when that day comes we do go back there, right? Because we know that's traumatic for an incoming sixth grader. And so
I'm gonna jump in real quick.
Yeah.
What's a PLC?
Oh yeah, so that's where the learning groups for it, I'll just break it down, for administrators getting together and talking about those things that are important underneath their umbrella, if you will, and how they can
what does the acronym stand for, though? What's a
so
PLC?
Professional learning communities, so that we can all learn together as a community.
We won't give
forward.
anybody a vocabulary test at the end, I promise. None of that.
We can do that for sure. But anyway, so yeah, so those are the things that are really first and foremost, and that's the beauty of having our digital engineers from all of these areas of focus, because they know what they need better than any of us do. Jonathan, you were gonna go ahead. Okay.
I was going to say you captured it. Yeah.
You did it good. And I, as a parent of an incoming sixth grader, I can tell you that those are questions I'm getting. How am I going to meet my teachers? What am I going to figure out? You know, I think those kids who are jumping schools, grades, advancing from elementary to middle and middle to high, you know, this is a hard transition for them. So I think those are really important conversations to have. One of the other questions that came in was about fostering relationships between students and classmates. Obviously, school is more than just the learning from knowledge. There's so much of school is those interpersonal relationships that kids develop, and that social emotional aspect. And so that's a big concern for families. How is that going to happen in a digital space?
So it's going to be different, but school will not be devoid of that. There are absolute ways for teachers to make sure that there is peer-to-peer collaboration for community building, as well as for just higher level academics. Things like using breakout rooms. So like in Zoom, we could be sitting right here, and then whoever's hosting this meeting could actually send us off to private little rooms where we could do 5 minutes of collaboration and then come back together and debrief, just like you would do in a classroom where you have students working together. So those types of activities are available. I've seen really great learning sessions where you use formats like Jamboard, which is like a Google whiteboard that students then can all jump on together, and they could add sticky notes and draw and do work together. So there's lots of things out there that make it available. It's different than being face-to-face, and I certainly recognize, I mean, I'm like everybody else sitting in my home and missing, you know, human contact from other people than my family. But we do things like this where we're still able to sit here and have conversation and to really talk about whatever it is that we want to talk about. So those opportunities are still available for students. And I guarantee that your teachers have been spending lots of time this summer learning these different platforms and looking at their regular lesson plans that work face-to-face and saying to themselves, how can I now make this work in an online manner? And they will.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great answer. So, and maybe this might help like tie it back together a little bit for some of our families, especially. What would you say are some of the key things related to digital learning that are the most important for schools and families to embrace together for a successful school year? Are there any like real high points for doing that?
I would just offer that we need to embrace grace, flexibility, and patience. And so if we can really embrace those three, I think, key thoughts as we're kind of slugging through the day by day, I think that we can make it through this year with flying colors and be super successful. This is going to be new. And I think if we understand the idea of patience and flexibility, because it's not just new for parents and families, it's new for students and it's new for the educators. The audience of students, they're the ones that are going to probably adapt to this the quickest. They understand how to use technology, you know, and especially this generation, like at, 2 years old, I feel like. So they're not the ones that we need to necessarily worry about how to access and use. It's really to make sure that they're using it in an academic function that's increasing their level of understanding, and we're increasing what they need to know to master the standards. But we just need to understand too that this is a whole new platform. So when teachers are giving like feedback, for example, it takes a lot longer on an online setting. It takes a minute to type out feedback versus a face-to-face conversation. So I think if we just can walk in this year with kind of those three common themes, I think that it would end with the understanding that we're all in this together. We are all one team working together. We can be really successful here in Nevada.
I'd also like to add that as the parents, our attitude matters. And if I am feeling anxious, which I am, I have 3 school-age kids, inside I feel very anxious. I try very hard not to let that come out on the outside, and I try outwardly to talk really positively about what's going to happen this school year, because my kids are very unsure and they're like, what is this going to look like? And will it look like the spring? And no, it's not going to look like the spring at all. And but what I put out, and if I have a calm, reassuring tone and say, we'll figure it out, then they tend to be more calm as well. And I try to talk about the upsides of it, like, hey, you get to keep sleeping in, you know, you don't have to have an early bedtime. You know, I find a hook for them. And so far that's worked pretty well. So I know there's a lot of anxiety, and I look at Facebook and I look at Twitter, and I can see how worried we are as parents. And how could we not be worried about our kids' education? But try to make sure on the outward that there's a sense of calm, because your children will feel that, and they will adapt much better if they feel like the waters are calm.
Jordana, I'm going to pull 2 things real briefly out of that. One is I see more and more parents saying, my kids are excited. Whatever
Good.
It looks like, my kids are excited. And then the second thing is, thank you so much. I think we're all spending a lot of time trying to help everyone understand that what happened in the spring was on Friday, everybody went home from school as usual. The decision was made over the weekend, and pardon me, bibbity bobbity boo, on Monday, everybody was supposed to be in this digital learning area. And that didn't come off as well as we would have liked it to have done. But it is different now. I know you guys have been working very hard for months now, so that this relaunch this fall looks a lot different. Sorry, Rebecca, I had to say that.
That's fine. I was just going to add, the question wasn't for me, but I was going to add something I've really learned this week is to ask my own kids what they're thinking, because it's surprising. Sometimes, even if you think you know your kids well, what they are missing or what they're excited about or what they're nervous about may be very different than what you expect. And so I think that that would be my tip for parents, is to really ask them what it is, because sometimes there are ways for you to address those concerns very easily once you realize that's what's the issue. And so always, you know, as parents, we always learn something new. Not that should have been new, but it was a learning lesson this week for me. One of the things that has come up, obviously, is that going to school is going to look different, hybrid or distance only. A lot of families are going to have to rely on daycare or other options for their kids because they still have to work regardless. And so they're really concerned about attendance, which a lot of that are state level policies. So I didn't know if Dr. Moore, you had anything to update, you know, I know the guidance issued by the state says there's daily contact with the teacher, but how is that going to work when a student is in daycare during educator hours?
It's a great question. So we worked really hard with what's called our Infinite Campus Governing Board. And so Infinite Campus is the student information system we use, and every school district has a representative. Just around that very same question, what is attendance going to look like in terms of accounting for students, but also for connecting with students. And so when we talk about attendance at a policy level, we really want to be mindful of sort of 2 separate entities. One being the contact with students. We want districts to ensure that a licensed educator is reaching out to all of their kids on a consistent basis. And that helps us ensure that students are having their needs met. That helps us to check in to make sure they're progressing. And then there's the actual attendance piece, which gets to more of the compliance factor. So making sure however instruction looks, whether it is through hybrid, where students are coming physically to a building twice a week and at home 3 days a week, whether they're virtually all 5 days out of the week, or whether they're coming in physically 5 days out of the week, making sure that we capture that time that's in school. And so the guidance that we came was the result of that effort between the conversation between the department and those school districts. And it really just amounts to those two things. We want to make sure that all of our students are receiving some sort of contact on a daily basis. And so for our parents who don't have internet devices or devices that connect to the internet or connectivity, that looks like districts having to think strategically about whether there's meal pickup or whether there's pickup for instructional resources and materials. How do I make sure that there's someone there to make contact with that child to say, hi, are you doing okay? Do you need help with your homework? Is there anything I can do for you? And then there's, of course, the attendance piece, which is, of course, helping us to account for students' time in instruction.
So if, like, my children do their work from 6 to 8 o'clock at night after the school day's done, but they've responded to teacher emails or checked off the assignments that were in Canvas for them, would that count as them having attended, even though it was done outside of the school hours?
So it very well could. That wouldn't be a policy decision that we would make at the state. That would be a local decision. But what you highlight is something that's very real, especially when we talk about the different types of digital learning, synchronous versus asynchronous. And so when we talk about flexibility, what we are seeing and hearing from some districts is, yes, that is the type of flexibility that they're granting, especially for students who are learning either hybrid or at a distance, is abandoning the notion that a student would have to be engaged in instruction from traditional hours. And perhaps if they're engaged in instruction and that's demonstrated through their work, that contact and attendance reflects that. So that's a very real scenario that you mentioned that, you know, deserves attention, consideration, and that I know schools and districts are examining.
Okay, so that would come down to a district decision as to what would count, if that would count. Okay, thank you.
One of the other questions we've had a lot of conversation around is online discipline. If a student acts inappropriately online in the meets or chats, I gather that we can't ask educators to be responsible for what kids are doing across all of their time on the internet. But certainly while they're, you know, in a class, whether it's whatever platform it is, how will that look for our families and our students?
So I'll jump in and then I'll have, of course, Jordana, our educator, as well as Cindi and Jayne. But when you think back to the start of school, I think back to my days as a teacher and a principal, right? You think of the first week, which is sort of that time to get acquainted. I mean, I always default to the babies, to the kinders at a K-8 school. And so you think of that first week, what is that really like? One, it's getting them comfortable with the environment, the physical space, right? Here's the restroom. This is your classroom. This is a desk. This is your neighbor. Then it's getting accustomed with the larger physical space. So maybe a tour of the school. Simultaneously, especially for the babies, you're doing that with the parents also, getting them to a place where they feel comfortable leaving their, you know, their prized possession for 8 hours out of the day. I think many of those same aspects apply to the digital space. There's going to have to be a level of comfortability, a level of introduction, a level of expectation setting, similar to how we do in a physical classroom. These are the expectations. These are potential consequences, both positive and negative. And I think educators will have to navigate that as well. And I'll just pause there.
I think that in the digital learning environment is very similar, like Jonathan was saying, to in-person learning, that teachers have to spend time building a community. We have to have the fun first day of school activities. We have to make sure there are entry points for students to feel comfortable in whatever the learning environment is. So this year it's online. Of course, there will still be some discipline issues that buildings will handle, how they're going to handle it. I assume down here in CCSD, there will be district mandated progressive discipline as we've had. I do suspect that the 10 days of professional development will include some of those types of situations so that teachers are well equipped to know what they can do when there are problems, how to develop a good classroom environment to kind of push off having those problems in the first place. But I assume that those are going to be school decisions, like at each building.
So kind of set up for success, which certainly makes perfect sense. And then the teachers obviously got to be the first line, but then clearly there would also be support from admin, the school building, you know, just in case something can't be easily resolved. And
Yes.
that sounds like a plan to me. Thank you.
We are very short on time, but I don't want to not ask this question. A lot of parents are concerned about how digital learning will work for special needs students, whether it's special education students, English language learners. You know, when we take quote unquote the average child, which I'm not sure there is an average child, but you know, sometimes people go, oh, well, they'll do fine. But parents, when we know our kids have challenges or different learning styles, like, so what supports are going to be available for special needs students to succeed in such a different platform?
That's a great question. So one of the things at the department is we've been really intentional about ensuring that we capture all of the federal guidance to be able to distribute to schools. And so with that in districts, what that looks like is that when you have children with special needs, we know that there's a wide spectrum of service and supports that our students with disabilities require. And so the first step is you have to look at each child individually. You have to look at what services do they require, and then what capacity do we have to meet that? So an example would be, if you have a student who may have a speech condition, who requires speech therapy, is there a world in which that could be done through a virtual platform, how we're conversing? You may have a student who has a more severe need that requires in-person support. And so what does it look like to help that family and that child to navigate that? So it's going to be really incumbent, and this is where the spirit of partnership will truly be tested, of both parents and families as well as the school and district coming together around that child to determine, one, what the needs are, but two, to what extent can those needs be met online? And if they can't, what accommodations can then be provided to have those needs met? That could require a modification in schedule. It may require a modification in the child's IEP, but those conversations will have to happen collaboratively with both parent and family, as well as school and district, and at certain ages, the child as well.
Thank you. We have also had several questions related to digital safety and concerns related to that. We actually are going to be tackling that topic later, so we're not going to go into that much here. But are there any resources on the website that the Digital Learning Collaborative, about online safety? Is that a topic that's been explored?
From my end, I'm in the marketing and communications end. We have not seen that yet. Jayne, you want to jump in on that?
I was gonna, yeah, I'll jump in too. Jayne and I have been in conversation with folks in the department who have resources along these lines, ethics, use of digital resources in an ethical manner, both from the student standpoint and also from the educator standpoint. So those resources will be posted soon on the website. They're being curated as we speak.
Okay, perfect. We are going to end with a closing question. What would, from each of you, what would you have as your number one tip for families to support their students as we transition to either hybrid or distance? What would be the one thing that you would share with families about supporting their student?
Have a sense of adventure.
I like that. Jayne?
Great.
I would say be calm, stay flexible, and take it day by day.
I would say jump right in there and see what they're doing. Learn what they're doing. Learn alongside them. Education doesn't stop.
Oh, I love that one too.
And this is an old adage from my former school motto, where learning pain is temporary, but pride is forever.
Yep.
Very nice. Thank
I like
you.
that. I think we all do need to be ready for a little, what do they say? Growth is pain. There's pain in growth, but you know, when we come out of it, we're better. And I definitely think our kids are going to learn some valuable life skills, even though this is a very challenging set of circumstances. I think there are going to be some resilient kids that come out of these years. They're pretty special in what they've already figured out. So Alison, thank you for moderating with me. Our panelists, Jordana, Jayne, Cindi, Jonathan, appreciate your time so much tonight as we all across the state navigate this new world caused by the pandemic. I think this is a great opportunity to see what can be done and maybe what we're going to keep some of. I personally will be very excited for the day we can go back and see people in person. But I also think that there's some great things that hopefully we can take out of this experience as well. So on behalf of Nevada PTA, thank you guys for joining us and taking the time. And one last time, does somebody want to share the website in case you want to access any of the Nevada Digital Learning Collaborative information?
Absolutely. nvdigitallearning.org.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And everybody have a great night.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.